Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, March 24th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Coming up, to what extent water is federally protected has in recent years been a contentious topic of debate. That debate just a few years ago made its way to the U.S.'s highest court.
The Supreme Court's decision was a gut punch to national protections for wetlands and for streams that don't flow year-round.
We will hear how protections for this precious resource are currently being debated by the Trump administration and what environmentalists are saying in response. But first, these news headlines. Hundreds attended a town hall on Sunday in Bakersfield focused on the future of Medicaid. KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports on the message brought by a high-profile Democrat to a Republican House district.
Ro Khanna represents Silicon Valley as a progressive Democrat. He spoke Sunday to a large crowd at Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center. It's located in Republican David Valledeo's district, which has the nation's highest Medicaid enrollment rate.
Now what happens if that Medicaid funding isn't there? Who's going to take care of our seniors? It's a death sentence.
The health insurance program is a target of potential cuts under the Republican-controlled Congress. That would affect 61-year-old Maria Salgado, whose brother is a double amputee enrolled in the program. She says getting her brother the in-home care he needs has already been a challenge.
Right now, he doesn't have that support. He should have it. He's 68 years old. Can't live by himself.
And cutting the program's funding would make getting that support even more difficult, she fears.
Absolutely. I'm concerned.
Bakersfield was just one stop in a tour of Republican districts by Khanna as he hits on the Medicaid message. He also made stops yesterday in Anaheim and Norco. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Bakersfield.
The newly appointed U.S. Secretary of Labor is suing a Central Valley farm company. As KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports, the lawsuit is over a crash that left 7 farm workers dead last year.
That crash happened as farm workers rode in a van during their morning commute. The van was headed to a farm near Firebaugh when it was struck by a Chevrolet pickup truck. It was carrying 8 farm workers and 7 of them died on impact. The driver of the pickup truck also died. Lori Chavez Dreamer is the newly appointed Secretary of Labor under the Trump administration. She's also a Hanford native. She announced her department is suing the company that employed the farm workers, known as Lion Farms out of Selma. The lawsuit alleges the company ignored transportation safety rules under the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. An investigation by the Department of Labor accuses the company of violating workers' rights related to wages and transportation. KVPR reached out to Lion Farms but did not hear back. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
The race for a vacant seat on the Fresno City Council still appears too close to call. The latest results in the special election for the city's 5th district show the results remain largely unchanged. Brandon Vang holds 50.1% of the vote, while his challenger, Elizabeth Jonathan Rosas, remains firmly in second place. A candidate needs at least 51% to win outright. Otherwise, there will be a runoff election among the top 2 vote-getters. Health officials in Tuolumne County are focusing a measles investigation on a fitness center. The county identified several areas inside the Sonora Sports and Fitness Center as potential places of exposure. This follows news of 2 measles cases announced last week. Tuolumne County officials are advising those who attended the center's gym, locker rooms, and restrooms on March 10th between 3 and 7 p.m. to monitor for symptoms. Measles symptoms include a fever, cough, or runny nose. Unvaccinated people, pregnant women, and infants under a year old are at highest risk of contracting the disease.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. The Clean Water Act is a hallmark of environmental laws here in the U.S. and dates back to the 1970s. That's when industrial pollution was so rampant, it made U.S. waterways effectively open sewers. John Devine is the Director of Freshwater Ecosystems at the Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC is a nationwide environmental advocacy group. I recently spoke with John about major changes the Trump administration has signaled it may make to the Clean Water Act. Proposed changes include weakening protections for wetlands and redefining what qualifies as a waterway that's worth protecting. California's federally managed rivers and reservoirs, some of which are right here in the San Joaquin Valley, would be caught up in those changes. But this environmental fight is not new. It dates back to Trump's first term when he installed similar restrictions, and the Biden administration later reversed them. To give us the full picture, John walks us through more of the history and new counteractions in this ongoing fight. He starts by explaining what the Clean Water Act protects.
The Clean Water Act is the federal law that is principally important for protecting rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, wetlands. It establishes water quality standards so that water bodies have to meet certain levels in order to protect things like people's use for swimming or fishing or things like that. And it also requires the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to establish technology standards for polluters based on, the best available technology in the industry.
So recently, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, under President Donald Trump, announced it would be changing how it defines U.S. waterways. That includes those wetlands, rivers, streams that you mentioned. And this is all related to the Clean Water Act. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Joe Biden's administration was defining waterways and how this is a departure from that?
Sure. A lot of it has to do with a 2023 Supreme Court case called Sackett versus EPA. In that case, the Supreme Court reversed decades of Clean Water Act protections for wetlands and many kinds of streams. And so what we're talking about now is the Trump administration has indicated an intent to make a very bad situation even worse. The Supreme Court's decision was a gut punch to national protections for wetlands and for streams that don't flow year-round. And what the Trump EPA is indicating that it will do is use language in that Supreme Court decision that is ambiguous to potentially protect even fewer waters in the future than they are now, which is a huge step back from what had historically been protected under the law.
And I believe Trump made a similar move back in 2017 that then Biden attempted to reverse prior to this court decision coming through, right?
That's exactly right. It has been a subject of a lot of controversy over the years, but until the Supreme Court ruled, it had been, with the exception of a brief period under the Trump administration, it had been standard practice to protect waters of all kinds that have significant impacts on downstream water quality. And unfortunately, what the Supreme Court said is that water quality doesn't matter under the Clean Water Act, apparently. And what's important is sort of the physical relationship between certain kinds of water bodies.
And I do want to get in a little bit more into some of these changes happening under Trump. But first, it might be worth noting that this topic could feel sort of like very in the weeds for folks who are just maybe recreational water users or don't think much about the wetlands or rivers in their areas. So in your view, why does this matter?
That's a fantastic question. So wetlands and small streams are critical for a bunch of reasons. tens of millions of people get drinking water from suppliers that rely on streams that flow part of the year or are headwater streams. Wetlands act as natural flood barriers and prevent millions and millions of dollars of flooding damage every year. And both streams and wetlands are critical habitat for all kinds of critters and other endangered species.
So can we talk specifically about what would change under Trump's new goals for the Clean Water Act?
So far, we're not entirely sure. What the Trump administration has said is that it's going to revise its Clean Water Act regulations and is considering potentially limiting the number of streams that are protected by the Clean Water Act based on the amount of flow annually that they have, maybe further limiting the Clean Water Act's protections for wetlands even if they're very close to or touching nearby waters.
And your organization, the Natural Resources Defense Council, is against these changes, right?
You betcha.
Why don't you elaborate on why? I mean, I would think this would impact, for instance, one area could be development.
That's right. Basically, the Clean Water Act requires that before someone dumps industrial or municipal pollutants into a water body or fills in a water body, including wetlands, for development purposes, that they go through an environmental review and permitting process to make sure that any harm that they might cause is avoided to the maximum extent they can and then mitigated by doing things like creating wetlands in other parts of the watershed or things like that. And so it is not a prohibition on development or industrial activity. All it does is make sure that when that activity happens, it's as less harmful to the environment as possible. But compliance with the Clean Water Act can cost companies money, and they'd prefer to avoid that if they can. And so for a long time, major industries from oil and gas to mining to industrial agriculture to the building development industry have tried to shrink the scope of the Clean Water Act to protect as few waters as possible. So that's what the fight is about, is what can our federal protections extend to, and will the Clean Water Act be able to continue to function as a real limitation on the kinds of harms that we saw before the early 70s when rivers were literally catching on fire?
And as we said, the Natural Resources Defense Council is against these changes for the Clean Water Act. Are there any specific actions you're taking, or how are you responding at this point?
Ultimately, we think the federal law needs to be fixed because the Supreme Court got it wrong. But that's going to take an act of Congress, and that can take some time. And in the meantime, there's a lot that we can do to slow the loss of wetlands and streams as a result of these kinds of decisions, including state-level protections. The tough thing is that there will be some states that don't do that, and that where the very limited protections now offered because of the Supreme Court's ruling will be all that's available. And so a lot of wetlands and streams are going to be filled or polluted as a result.
That was John Devine, Director of Freshwater Ecosystems at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Just last month, 2 California state senators introduced a bill that would bolster water protections in the state. Senate Bill 601 would, in part, increase local permits for construction and ensure California's drinking water standards are as strong, if not stronger, than federal requirements. John told us the Natural Resources Defense Council supports the bill. And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.